Others may say that climate change in itself is a buzzword. Others, it's the greatest threat to our current existence as a humanity. In today's motion is St. Bakhita Siakago versus Archangels Kanyweri, and the motion of the day reads, governments should prioritize economic growth over climate change mitigation. I read the motion again. Governments should prioritize economic growth over climate change mitigation. All the best to both teams. Team proposition, first speaker, you have 3 minutes.
I am proposing the motion that says government should prioritize on economic growth than on climate change. My first concern is on definition, and my first definition is, what is government? Government, this is a control system of an area. For example, in Kenya, we have a government that controls all the activities, economic, social, and political. Another word that is on the motion that should be also put in concern is to prioritize. Prioritize is to put more emphasis on one thing than on the other. So when you prioritize something, you give it first chance or first opinion or first word or first go in that what you have prioritized. Another definition that is on that topic is climate. What is climate? Climate is the average weather condition of an area experienced in a period of 30 to 35 years. Another definition is, what is mitigation? Mitigation, this is the reduction. Economic growth. Economic growth is the increase of amount of goods and services produced per head of population over a period of time. Another definition is, now in total, climate with the mitigation. Climate change mitigation, an action to limit climate change by reducing emission of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, such as sulfur dioxide. So my point is, I would like to say that government should prioritize on economic growth because that is the most key foundation of our country. My first point to propose this is to say, funds, if we look at this, funds that are required for the climate change mitigation, they come from economic activities. Without having a base of funds in our country, we are very difficult or unable to control climate. So we should focus first on we should focus first on economic growth than on climate change mitigation, because climate change mitigation requires funds which is attained from the economic activities. Another thing, economic change mitigation in natural economic while growth requires more concern, because in our country, if you look at the state we are in now, what is required to be kept on more focus on is the economy. Our country, Kenya, we have never faced such crisis of climate like in Japan. Our country, we are somehow stable in the climate. So the must thing or the thing at hand is the economy of our country. We should focus on the economy of our country because that is the thing at hand. Also, funds that are required in climate change mitigation are made available in this well-being state economy to conduct research and to pay every meteorologist.
Team opposition, first speaker, you have 3 minutes.
So, as we all know that the government has many things on its plate, and today our motion narrows the many things into two main: the climate change mitigation and the economic growth. And today we are here to see if the government will choose to be a decent man and join us in opposing the motions that it should mainly measure on economic growth than climate change mitigation, strongly opposing. I, Rosina Madeka from the mighty Bakhita School, will be taking you through the motion. Governments should prioritize economic growth over climate change mitigation. To prioritize something, it doesn't mean that you're going to let the other side go. No, it means that you're going to measure mainly on one thing as well as supporting the other. Climate change mitigation is well defined by the Solar Pulse Foundation site. It is a global modification of the climate over a long period of time. While economic growth is well defined by the Kenya Revenue Authorities, it is typically measured as the rate of change in output, or more specifically in real gross domestic products. Mitigation, to mitigate something is to make something less harmful. So basically, our motion says that the government should measure mainly on economic growth over climate change mitigation, over reducing the impacts caused by climate change. While as the first opposer, I strongly oppose that because, onto my first point, climate change poses big threats to the economy. The climate change effects such as global warming and inconsistent rainfall patterns pose a negative effect on the natural environment. As we all know, the natural environment is central to economic growth since it provides the goods and services needed to improve the economy. So these effects activities such as agriculture, which holds a bigger part in the economy. For example, we have the economy of Uganda as well supported by the World Bank. It states that 23% of the Uganda's economy is held by the agriculture sector of coffee. Thus, I strongly oppose by saying that maintaining the conditions of natural assets will be a key factor in sustaining economic growth for longer term. On to my second point. Disasters caused by climate change affect macroeconomic situation and taxation. Research has shown that when natural disasters such as floods and drought occur, a lot of properties is destroyed. By destroying the property, this will lead the property such as, let's talk about the agriculture sector. If the agriculture sector is destroyed, this will lead to lack of goods, which is going to bring about higher taxation with low productivity rate. With this, I strongly oppose that the government should mainly measure on economic growth than climate change, because by improving the climate change, we'll have solved the economic growth, then we'll have killed two birds at the same time. Thank you.
In proposition, you have 3 minutes.
Grace Mwende from Hakejas, Kanyweri High School, here to propose a motion that the government should first prioritize on economic growth over climate change mitigation. It's so melancholic that despite the current economic crisis we are facing, we as Kenyans, my fellow debaters can still stand firm and echo that the government should first focus on economic change. It's so unfortunate. We first deal on what is on hand and affect most of the Kenyans before we go to the climate. We work first on what is on the table and what is affecting our economy in Kenya today. So I feel that the government should first work on the economy, because in these days, we as Kenyans, we are living in a very challenging life, especially for the low people living in a very low status. The second reason, it is because when we improve our economic status, we are going to have diversification, whereby we have more choices and more occupations, whereby, for example, in Kenya today, many of the youths who have graduated have no jobs opportunities because our country cannot meet the job opportunity demands. But if we focus more on economic growth, we shall eliminate this, because most of the youth now have become drugs addicts and have become the city rogers because they are more idle since they have nothing to do. And even some youth now have not even married because they cannot take responsibilities of their family. My next argument is because if we focus more on climate, I feel that we should focus on economy, because this is what covers the most of the world. Because in most parts of the world, not every part of the world that has a diversification of climate changes. Economy affects everyone, but not all parts of the country has problems to do with climate. The next point is about the long-term investment. If we focus on growth, for example, we start the industries, we start infrastructures and technologies, we are sure that at the end of the day in future, we can meet our demands. But if you focus on climate changes, for example, in agriculture, you are able to sustain the needs for a very short period. But if we invest maybe in industries, these are investments that are going to meet our demands even for the future demands. The next point is about the cases of borrowing. The country today is experiencing a lot of problems. The reason is because our government took loans from the outside country. Suppose we were good, economically equipped, we could not be facing this problem. But because we mentioned on climate change, this is why we are facing a lot of challenges. So, my fellow debaters, you want to tell me today that if you are not the government of Kenya, you cannot handle the situation that we are facing now, you'll go to the climate change. It is so unfortunate. And that is why I am feeling that if this continues, this means that if this could be the government we are having today, we could be deteriorating the action more and more. Our situation could worsen. It is so unfortunate if these are the kind of leaders we are going to have for tomorrow. Thank you.
Team Opposition, second speaker, you have 3 minutes.
I'll take this chance to ask my fellow debaters, second speaker, prospectively. You talked about economic growth and the graduates that are increasing day by day. How will you enable economic growth? Yet there is minimum job employment. You've talked about that, yes. But where is the evidence of encouraging job employment opportunities for these graduates? Climate change is something that takes a lot of time. It's something of a long period of time. So I think my debate is lying to me when saying that dealing with climate change poses only short-term effects or changes. So basically, climate change, once we deal with it, it's something that occurred for a long time. So basically, we are going to have long-term changes or effects. My first point, urgency of the climate change. Currently, in northeastern region, we know the state, even without a doubt, we know that they're facing food insecurity due to their climate. So prioritizing economic growth without climate aggravates the problems like this. So basically, economic growth involves industrialization or betterment of transport facilities. So with these two sectors, basically, there's also increase in gas emissions, which are the fumes. So this risks irreversible damages and thus compromises the well-being of the future generations, basically by adverse weather events in terms of floods, drought, or famine. Number 2, we have green growth opportunities. As from sphere.com, transitioning to a low carbon economy, mainly by introduction of renewable energy, thus as biomass, solar, geothermal, wind, hydropower reduces the carbon emissions from 0 or to ultimately none. Thus, this is going to create jobs and spur investments in the specific renewable energy opportunities, as well as energy efficiency and sustainable infrastructure. Governments can tap into these economic opportunities and drive sustainable and inclusive growth. So you see, by focusing on climate change mitigation, we even have more better job opportunities, which my debater was talking about, that we are going to offer to these graduates. The current economic state. So number 3, long-term economic risks. These long-term economic risks are basically caused by the climate change that we have in Kenya right now. Basically, by extreme weather events or resource scarcity can disrupt supply chains. And by this, when there's something like weather events, we have increase in insurance costs because the liability to which these effects are going to account to your property or to your life insurance or health insurance, it's going to increase. Thus, there is increase in insurance costs and harms agriculture and tourism sectors. So with these points, I believe that basically after we deal with climate change, we are killing 2 birds with 1 stone by raising the climate change to better effects, thus reducing its harm effects, as well as increasing economic growth at the same time.
Team Proposition, third speaker, you have 3 minutes.
It's like our opposing team are like a boxer who has more experience in battles, and so he thinks that in every battle it's a guarantee of winning, not knowing that he's dealing even with the trainers themselves. On stage, Glenn Gerald from the Archangels Kanyweri. First of all, the government of Kenya shouldn't prioritize on the climate change mitigation than the economic growth. This is because even the paraphernalia required in the G20 countries to curb the cryogenics which deal with climate change mitigations require funds. These funds will only come as a result of us improving our climate change. So I vehemently reject your point, my fellow debaters. The second point is, if you consider the UAE countries, for example, the Qatar, the Dubai, these countries are in fact in desert countries. But if you look their level of development, you cannot compare it with our country Kenya. Since independence, our country Kenya has been focusing majorly on the climate change mitigation. And that's why you can see how our economy has deteriorated. I'm sure, I'm aware, each one of you here knows how the economy deteriorating in the current situation in Kenya now has caused drastic effects. Are you ignorant of that? My fellow debaters, how can you ask such a question? How can you ask such a question that how will we able to grow the economic growth yet there is minimum job employment? Yes, these minimum job employments, for us to eradicate them, we must first focus on the economic growth by even attracting foreign investors so that many of our youths may get employment. Not all of our youth can become farmers. You have to know that, because by mitigating the climate, we will be more focusing on agriculture, because it's around the main economic activity in our country now. But you have to consider that if we focus on economic growth, then even we will reduce the debts that our country owes. Look how our country, the citizens are being overtaxed just simply because we want to mitigate climate change. When I started, I just told you to compare our country with the UAE countries. Those countries, they never borrow. This is simply because they have focused much on economic growth, because they know economic growth is something that is under the full control of our hands. Yet climate change, these are things that are also influenced by the natural factors. Okay, if you look in goal number 8, which states that the decent work and economic growth goal seeks to promote sustainable, inclusive, and sustainable, full and productive employment for all people and for all citizens. So I really vehemently agree with the motion that says government prioritize economic growth over climate change mitigation. Thank you.
Team opposition, third speaker, you have 3 minutes.
I'll start by rebutting my third speaker, who has just said that countries like Dubai and those countries are developing, are first working on their economic growth. Those countries started first focusing on their climate change before even coming to the economic growth. I have a question for you. Can you focus on economic growth, yet the ones who are focusing on that economic growth are sick? Can you? You cannot. Gloria Kadambi from the great St. Bakhita girls, studying on you, firmly opposing the motion. On to my first point, public and social responsibility. Climate change has created a significant attention in public discourse. With increasing awareness of public, we are able to curb the climate change effects since all the public are aware. Actually, ignoring climate change over economic growth can lead to public discontent and social unrest. So it is easy to combat those effects since all the public are aware. On to my second point, global commitments. Addressing climate change is a global challenge that requires a collective action. International agreement like the Paris Agreement emphasizes on the need of countries to come together to work together to limit the global warming and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Prioritizing on economic growth will counterfact or undermine these commitments that can lead to damage of reputation and strained diplomatic relations. By prioritizing on climate change mitigation, government can demonstrate leadership, strengthen diplomatic ties, and contribute to global efforts to protect the planet that we live in. On to my third point, environmental and human costs. Climate change poses a significant risk to the environment and human societies. Rising temperatures, extreme weather events, sea level rise, and ecosystem disruptions can lead to widespread ecological damage, loss of biodiversity, food and water scarcity, as well as displacement of communities. It is therefore crucial for government to adopt sustainable practices to mitigate climate change. With these effects, we are able to see that climate changes are adverse to the development of all sectors in the countries. So overall, concentration on them will bring overall development, since the climate is surrounding us everywhere. Even where we are studying right now, there is climate change effects. With that, I rest my case.
Team Proposition, you have 1 minute to give your closing remark.
On the question my fellow debaters, you have asked about job opportunities. What I meant is that by focusing on economic growth, we shall have more firms and improving infrastructures by creating more job opportunities. Then my question is, if you focus on climate change, then suppose now you are faced with landscapes and natural occurring calamities. Where will you get the funds from to restore your current situation if your economic growth is not well up? Then you have asked about the sick people. I don't understand the relationship between sickness and climate change, because it's like you are supporting our point, because earth sectors are on economic growth, whereby our country has well-equipped hospitals to deal with any emerging disease like the corona. For example, when we were faced with corona, how did the climate change help us to curb that? But the state which are economically grown up give us funds, and that is how we were able to manage it, and now we are okay.
Team Opposition, you have 1 minute to give your closing remark.
According to the motion, it states that they have to prioritize economic growth over climate change mitigation. And for economic growth to prosper, we require good conditions that basically are affected by climatic conditions. Take, for instance, maybe industrialization. For you to build an industry, you require an area which is affordable or even comfortable for the facilities itself. For example, with neglecting climate change, will have adverse weather events such as inconsistent rainfall, which cause floods. Where am I going to build this fancy company of mine if the whole area is flooded? Basically, on social or public knowledge, we want to enable the public to know the adverse effects of the climate, because due to this awareness, they are able to find solutions themselves to strive and work against the climate change mitigation, thus helping themselves overall. And with combating climate change, there is obviously other ways of improving economic growth in general.
Looking at the motion, the proposers had a chance to actually say that, and they brought this out, that we get the fund source first, we prioritize economic growth, then we get money for climate change mitigation measures. The opposers had a good idea on merging the two. We can do climate change mitigation, but we also have economic growth, so there's a balance. We should have flown with that now argument, because it would have now brought the argument. Both teams, there was an error at some point. All of you are talking about climate change, and the motion is talking about climate change mitigation. So most of the points were on climate change effects, but we're not looking at the mitigation measures. Are we talking about reforestation? Are we talking about things that will now mitigate the effects of climate change? So both teams had an error on that, so we were trying to see how this correlates with the motion.
let's talk just a little bit about the motion. Government should prioritize. That this is actually a correlation motion. We are talking about one thing being prioritized than the other, is it? Let's go economic growth, let's go climate change. And I think the first, I think that was Rosina, who brought in an element of let's try and balance both, right? Let's try and balance both. And I thought, okay, that's a good angle that we can't leave either behind. And I thought the rest of the team would pick up on that, but you ended up deciding on one other end. Yvonne, good questions, good balance. Gloria as well, good questioning as well. I felt like you had a higher priority because at least you gave some examples that were backed up. However, Gloria, you don't want to read too much because you're speaking to us as well. So sometimes you can glance at your notes, but then look at the people, all right? Let's feel like you had mastered this particular topic, all right? And then avoid saying the public's had. Just address them, the public has, all right? All the best.
And we'll move straight to the results. The judges have awarded St. Bakhita Siakago with 62.5%. A round of applause, please, for St. Bakhita. And the judges have awarded the Archangels Kanyweri with 61.5%. A round of applause, please, for the Archangels. And the winners of this debate is St. Bakhita Siakago with 62.5%. A round of applause, please, for the winning team. Thank you very much. We have come to the end of this debate, and until next time, it is goodbye from us here. Make sure to check our social media handles for more of this content on YouTube, on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok, and Threads at The Debate Circle. Kwaheri.